Hey, I'm Eugene from Work&Be Supply, and we're here today with Rachel Segal. We're excited to introduce this new series to you. It's called What the Hell Do You Do?, where we profile different creatives and see interesting ways that people make money and kind of create their own living. So Rachel, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Why don't we start? What the hell do you do?
So my partner and I, he's a web designer developer. I am a digital content strategist who sort of runs the gamut from helping on website builds to full social media strategies. We work together digitally, and then we also farm. So we have 10 acres on a remote island 6 hours outside of Vancouver.
So how did that setup come to pass? Because I'm sure those two jobs are like total opposites in people's minds.
Yeah. So both of us are originally from the city. We lived in downtown Toronto separately, not together, for years. And then we were together for about 6 months in Toronto and had an opportunity to move out west. First still downtown with, full-time jobs. So we did that. We were still sort of chose to, by moving out west, be outside the city, but we didn't make as far of a leap as we then subsequently went on. And then both of us were pretty burnt out on the whole full-time agency grind and just felt like we needed a break. And so part of our motivation originally for moving so far outside the city was just cost of living. Mm-hmm. And so we looked at, what it would cost and what we would need to bring in if we were staying in, the type of environment we were currently in and just the cost of living. And so we went onto Craigslist and we found this cabin on a 350-acre farm for less than $1,000 a month, and we said, sold. Amazing. Yeah, so we did that, and it just brought down, as far as what we had to generate, it just brought that anxiety level down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find a lot of people are they dream up this huge scope of like, oh, I want to have all these things, but you limit yourself within like your current environment.
Totally.
What was that like when you first kind of started thinking of like, oh, well, maybe I don't need to be in the city every day. Maybe I don't need to be like, I don't know, half an hour drive from anybody.
Yeah. It was, I sort of look back on it and I kind of think, what the hell were we thinking a little bit? Just because we ended up being very fortunate. We had really strong relationships with companies and brands in both Toronto and in Vancouver. A little bit less so in Vancouver, but that's subsequently grown. And we just took this leap of faith. So Scott had already started freelancing a little bit ahead of me and was able to do that. And it just worked out in a way that, as soon as we sort of put that sign out and said, we're doing this now and everything, it snowballed from there. Mm-hmm. So we had a really good contract that helped lay the foundation and let us just sort of hit the ground running and feel like, okay, we don't have to chase new business the minute we get there. And that led to other things. And so it was definitely a very, like, again, in hindsight, I think about it and I'm like, that was a really big leap. You're pretty risk adverse, but it just felt like the right decision for sure. Yeah.
And so from the kind of like running your own personal agency side, to people who maybe aren't in marketing, like what does that mean day to day? What are you doing? What are you not doing?
Yeah. It really depends on who we're working with. So we work with some, smaller early stage tech startups. And so we might be very hands-on. We're doing all the billing. We're doing everything top to bottom and having to be fairly agile and nimble as far as what it is that they need. Or I'm being brought in a more, big brand institutional corporate environment just to help advise on social and digital strategy, especially a lot of thought leadership as executives are getting more, comfortable in the social space. There's a huge demand for that. And so in those environments, there's less administrative work. There's less, I'm usually not as actively involved in all of the scoping and the client management and everything. I'm more just, able to set strategy and help them be able to execute it properly.
Cool. Yeah. And what sort of stuff were you working on kind of like before this move that set you up for that?
Big brands like consumer packaged goods, lots of healthcare and pharma and, over-the-counter products that, it was, the agency experience, from my perspective, when I was doing that full time was just an incredible, it was just an incredible opportunity to just like throw yourself in the deep end and really get to immerse yourself in these brands that have a very, established process for how they're developing marketing strategies. And I think we've seen since then how that has had to evolve and shift and be less, onerous and extended, and the timelines are faster and faster. But as a foundation for just knowing and understanding the way that brands of all sizes operate, it was huge. Yeah.
In terms of like, so obviously you're kind of working at it, you're going out, finding your own clients, building relationships. Who are, maybe at like different levels, who are the people that actually end up hiring you, like specific roles of people, and kind of how do you find that companies connect and look for this type of work?
So, it's interesting. I feel like a lot of it ends up coming through word of mouth. And I'll get introductions from former bosses, colleagues, people that have worked with us independently in the past who, either they just feel like, we're small and nimble and able to sort of execute really quickly and efficiently. We don't have an overhead where we're trying to manage an office. So we really are able to just scale it. And that's been super beneficial. We've had some really rewarding nonprofit work that for us is still, reasonably lucrative and feels really good. But, for a bigger institutional brand, it might be harder for them to take that on. So that's been really great. Is
there a particular project that you're kind of like stands out in mind?
Yeah. So we worked on Mosaic BC. It's a big nonprofit out in British Columbia. They do a tremendous amount of work with immigrants and new refugees who are trying to get work and placement. They provide so many resources for housing, for support systems. I mean, it's just hundreds and hundreds of organizations that they support. And so for us, it was obviously tremendously gratifying because there's such a need. And then it also, the team themselves, for being, a very big organization with lots of very, very dynamic and passionate stakeholders, they held to their word when they said to us, "No, we can be nimble, we can move fast, we can work with you collaboratively." And we're like, "Oh, those aren't words that come with this type of an industry." And they held to it. And in that role, the person that originally brought us on board is in a communications capacity, and then our main client, our main partner, was in a newly founded like website management, digital, strategy role. And so he was the sort of person that became our sort of go-to and our collaborative partner in the process.
Cool.
Yeah.
What about then shifting from the kind of marketing side to the farming side?
Yeah.
You started a quite popular blog and I guess Instagram account, First Time Farmer.
Yep.
Was that part of the idea going into it, or is that something that sort of you saw an opportunity to do? And
yeah, we bought the domain name when we were on Bowen. So we bought the domain name with 4 chickens, and we're like, we're moving to a farm. And so the intention at the time was very much for us to capture, like, we're moving to this farm and we're going to immerse ourselves in this already very well established, almost institutional woofing destination out on the West Coast. And when we got there and we started to be more on the ground, we sort of, took a step back and still were documenting through photos, but it felt very, very much what like we almost needed to get a few years under our belt before we could really be talking about it, other than just like recounting our day. So we're like, Instagram, we can recount our day, but for the more thoughtful stuff, it just, we actually found we needed more time to digest. So we didn't actually, I had like my own little half-hearted blogs that I would start, but we didn't really take that on until we moved to where we started looking for land. We sort of decided that we really at that point we wanted to do this, and we knew that we didn't want to move back to an urban environment. And so that was the point where we said, okay, let's actually let's be this, let's do this, and have that be what we're doing. And so we changed the name. Previously, the Instagram account was just my personal feed. And then because Scott had started to contribute his photography and everything, it just felt stupid to have it be me.
Lie.
Yeah, I'm like, exactly. I didn't take that photo. People would be like, that's great. And I'm like, thanks. Crap. And so it felt like we needed to have something that at least spoke to the fact that this was a collaborative effort. And so then we had this incredibly influential parenting blogger, who's not a parent himself, but an amazing uncle out of New York who picked up our photo that I had taken of Scott. And
who is it?
The baby guy NYC. He's a very, very cool individual, and he actually comes from an agricultural background. He grew up on a farm. So we reached out to him and we said, thank you so much. You can name a couple goats. And he got back to us and we've corresponded. And he's just like, it's not even just that he liked the photo. He was just really super passionate about like, good on you. This is so important. People need to know where their food comes from. So that sort of catapulted this, okay, like there's a real community, not just like people we picked up along the way. We have to do something about that. And so we sort of started to think a little bit more, and we've more recently kind of looked at it and taken a step back, and our kids are getting a bit older. And so we're trying to sort of determine what we want to do with it that's maybe a little bit more systematic as far as like telling that narrative a little bit more consistently versus, jumping back and forth between really nice, beautiful photo of a goat to like our selfies, randomly.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Interesting. How's that kind of like fed into your other work and vice versa? Do you notice that sort of like moving between those two spaces?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like even just a few years ago, your social media presence almost said something about your street cred as a digital strategist, for better or for worse. And I think there's people that absolutely is the case, and they are tremendous strategists for brands and for companies, and they also have these amazing followings. And then there's other people who have amazing followings and have done a brilliant job building their brand, but they really don't have that knowledge and expertise and skill level to also be able to transfer that over to a brand. So, it has been a nice thing for people to be like, oh, you know how to do that. And it doesn't mean that I can necessarily replicate like, okay, I'm going to get your Instagram account to 25,000 people.
First thing, chickens
exactly. First thing, soup. Yeah. You're like, what? So it definitely, it's been something there. And then otherwise I think anything that we're doing in the social space has been just a really good test bed for certain things. Like I'll test little ads and I'll do little things with like $5 here or something just to sort of see what happens. Yeah. Especially if ad platforms are doing something that are new. Like if they've done something interesting on Twitter, and I accidentally actually launched a Twitter campaign with one of the tweets from like years ago. So yeah, like there's things that have been definite misses, but
I think that's a good way of looking at it though, because we definitely experienced that as well, where you kind of early on you're like, oh yeah, it's like ads, people are going to buy all this stuff and come and like follow us. And it is really just, I think, personally healthy to treat it as like a test and experiment and see like what works, what doesn't, because it's totally different. Like what's your experience, I guess, having worked with a lot of different companies, and especially a lot of people just think that's the magic solution to all the problems.
Yeah. I think there's definitely, people sort of see it and they're like, well, what's the formula? How do you do that? And there's definitely certain archetypes and things that work consistently, but that's where exactly once you're in the space, you don't get stuck on, oh, this works really well, and maybe that's actually from 6 months ago. And at this point it's stale and people have seen it too much. And so that speed at which everything from a digital social perspective is going just makes it kind of impossible. You can't step away. I'll never be able to delete my Facebook account.
Yeah. What do you find your day-to-day is like now that I guess you're in control of your time, you have these kind of competing things competing for your attention. Yeah. What's your actual kind of, people imagine these dream days, what's your actual day like?
So our day is very different oftentimes, but we've got 2 young kids, we've got, the farming aspects. I often work on Toronto time. And so a typical day oftentimes will actually be me kind of like sneaking out first thing in the morning. I'll go to the coffee shop and I'll like knock out phone calls and some work before 9. So they open at 7:30. So I'll be there at 7:30 to just like get dedicated work in. Everybody else can sleep in, and I'll like get a head start on just what needs to happen. So that's been a good routine that we've sort of settled into in the last little while. And then it's nice because I can come back. The kids will just be getting up or something, and I can like just say, okay, the next hour, the next 2 hours are family time. Yeah,
and you already feel accomplished from earlier. You're not thinking about that.
Exactly. I'm sort of riding that high of I've been responsive. All the things that were sort of like sitting in my inbox, I'm good. Like I'm good for a bit. So that's really good. And then, because a lot of the work that I'm doing has kind of become really busy, and the sort of difference between our workload, at least from a work perspective, I shouldn't say that, or from a more corporate marketing perspective versus the farming perspective, has really fallen a lot more on me. Scott is very heavily invested in the farming side, and he becomes that. And once our kids are a little bit older, I think it'll be easier for us to then triage all of that again together. But in this current phase, it's very much like, all right, I've got the client work, you've got the farming stuff. We both manage the kids depending on what needs to happen. But we hit this point with the number of projects that we had in the summer where we're like, this is too much. There's too much of this. Like, well, how much do you need to get that done? No, I need this hour. So we sort of said, it's time to take a step back and reframe that a bit.
What are some of the like kind of, I guess, like future paths of both these worlds, and also like where do you see kind of moving both with the farming and the blog, but also your own work?
Yeah. So I think with this work, you sort of, at any point, you have to make the decision of whether you're a specialist or a generalist. And I've been able to really successfully and happily be a generalist, where I have a pretty diverse set of skills that I can bring to the table, and people really enjoy that. Whereas, somebody who's more specialized in an area that is really beneficial and critical for marketing, there's nothing wrong with that. But you have to sort of make that decision. Yeah. And if you do, and you're able to figure that out early on.
Can you give maybe an example of a specialist in marketing?
Yeah, so I feel like public relations, for example. If you're wanting to be, a media relations specialist, and it is a full-time job to build those relationships with media. I mean, just establishing it's a very small, fragmented market. It's so different than the world that I play in. Whereas on the digital side, being a bit more of a jack of all trades and knowing how to execute things from start to finish it's a benefit. But that doesn't mean that if I've got a more complex content problem, or if I'm doing something a little bit more involved on the advertising side, I may engage someone that has even deeper skills than I do to be able to really just own that piece of it. So I feel like that's really helpful, especially as you're looking to move up. And
what is that like? Like, I find a lot of times you're kind of like in that mindset, like you're doing stuff on your own and getting things done. And even in front of clients, to be like, oh, well, all this other stuff, we're gonna, even though this person's gonna do a great job, they're gonna kind of like take it up to a next level. I find as a generalist, people are often like, well, we want you to do the thing. Yeah. Like, how do you start dealing with that?
It's interesting. I feel like what I've run up against is you feel like it's a big issue, and then when you actually get into it with somebody and you allow yourself to just rip off the Band-Aid and have that person be at least a little bit more front and center and not hide them behind. I have a community manager that I work with a lot, and she's incredible at content and just knows how to build communities, and she's amazing. But oftentimes she's sort of like pushed to the back with some of the agencies that I work with or projects, because you're thinking about, well, we want to limit how many people are in the room. And when she does have the opportunity to be there, she adds value instantly. And so I feel like, to a certain degree, just kind of setting the expectations from the get-go that, this is the
show
team.
It even.
Yeah, versus having to stress about broaching that later on is the biggest thing. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And what do you think, like, let's say, maybe not your specific example or similar to that, like someone wants to be, okay, I want to work with large companies, whether it's marketing or something else, but I also want to kind of like live a different, not the sort of life associated with a lot of those careers, right? Yeah. What are the kind of first steps early on? Is it just kind of like get that base established and then do the move, just start? What are the kind of like maybe one thing someone can do tomorrow to start working towards that, and something a little longer term?
I think what's interesting is we'll see more of these opportunities to make that shift. I think we were really lucky that the industry was already moving in that way. There's so much more fluidity between what the expectations are as far as loyalty when it comes to agencies. And there's definitely still like super big brand agencies that if you're in that agency, the expectation is you're in that agency.
You are that agency.
You are that agency. You live and breathe it. That's part of your brand. And that's not a bad thing. And there's a lot of brands that really need that. But I think we're seeing some really, really interesting dynamic agencies. There's one down in the States, Modern Tribe. There's another one out on the West Coast, Brightweb, that take a much more nimble approach as far as how they can scale up or down depending on the clients that they're bringing on. And so all of a sudden you're able to say, okay, well, I can unburden myself with the stress of being tied to just one agency, and perhaps I can freelance for multiple agencies. And clients are becoming more open and familiar with that too. They just sort of expect that.
Sure, it kind of snowballs. The more people do it, the more.
Exactly. Like, just bring the best people to the room. It doesn't have to be the person who's sitting next to you every day at the office. I just want the best people on my team. So I think that's a big, tremendous thing. Your reputation is everything. Like, that's probably, this is such a small industry. And so I do feel like, at this point, it would be hard for somebody just getting started to like move out to where we are and then be able to establish themselves without getting to the point where they have that personal presence too in social. And I don't know that would benefit them as much as it should. So I do feel like there's a tremendous amount of value in the institutions that still, for the large part, live and breathe in cities. So, it's sad to say, I'm not saying it won't be like that in the future, but right now, I mean, if the dream is to do something similar to what we're doing, I definitely would say put your time in, take every opportunity and definitely like aim high when it comes to the brands and the companies you're working with.
Yeah.
And that will help you along the way.
I'm sure if you're kind of start doing that with a certain kind of like aspect like that, eventually I'm going to go, you could probably start setting it up a bit earlier, like different types of clients that would appreciate that, and so on.
Well, and I've got somebody that I just started talking to who she had maybe 2.5 years of agency experience. I mean, really, when I think about it, not a tremendous amount of experience. She is just, I mean, she's game. She's ready to go. She is so good at what she does, and she's independent now, and her dance card is full. Like, she has as many clients as she needs and then some. And she's done a really good job sort of setting her rates super, like, not cheap, but reasonably, so that people are able to get up to speed and start working with her. And even that, from a credibility standpoint, is huge. And again, she brings like a diverse skill set to the table. She's not just coming in saying, oh, I only do community management. She's able to cover off a whole gamut of things for people, which is big.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much. Is there anything, maybe let people know where they can check your stuff out, your website?
So our website is firsttimefarmers.com. It's woefully out of date. But we have Instagram.com/firsttimefarmers as the primary way to keep in touch with the farming adventures. And then I have my personal website, rachelsegal.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much for checking out the first episode of What the Hell Do You Do? We hope to do a lot more of these. Now we're releasing a new video every week, so make sure you hit subscribe and get that like button if you want to see more episodes of this. Thanks a lot.